When it comes to heavy-duty trucking and zero-emissions trucks, the environment is one of shifting regulations, lawsuits, and a lot of uncertainty. A new administration has thrown even more question marks into the mix. We'll look at these issues on this episode of HDT Talks Trucking. So, Lacy, start off and tell us a little bit about what it is you do at Rush Enterprises.
Sure. So my role here at Rush is to help our customers and all of our executives and sales team to understand the rapidly changing regulatory environment that we find ourselves in. It's really an unprecedented time with a lot of complexities from CARB regulations to EPA, and then OEM by OEM, differing interpretations of these regulations. So it's become a very complex environment. And then on top of that, there are the fleet-specific regulations that impact the fleets directly. And so what we've found is over the last couple of years, every regulated party tends to look at which regulation impacts them directly. So the engine manufacturers are looking at the engine regulations, and then the chassis OEMs are looking at the chassis and typically also the engine regulations. And then the fleets are all looking at the fleet-specific regulations, but all, whether it be low NOx omnibus, advanced clean trucks, or advanced clean fleet, they're all independent, but they are all interrelated, and they impact what our customers can buy and what we can sell them. So each of them impact each other. So you pull one string, the other side gets pulled. So you have to kind of think of it holistically so that you understand the full impact, because there's been a lot of cases in the last year where a fleet is looking at ACF and their electrification requirements under that regulation. And, if all their vehicles are in group 3, let's say, which is sleeper trucks or specialty vehicles, they wouldn't have any fleet specific electrification requirements until 2030. But when you look at ACT, if they want to continue buying combustion vehicles between now and then, the OEM has zero emission vehicle sales requirements, which they are pushing through to the dealer. So I cannot actually fulfill an order unless I'm meeting those requirements, if that makes sense.
Right. So the advanced clean trucks rule, which affects manufacturers, ends up affecting fleets, even if they're not required by advanced clean fleets rule yet to buy an electric truck, because there simply aren't enough electric truck or traditional diesel trucks are going to be available for them to buy if they still want to keep buying diesels, right? Does that make sense?
Well, kind of. It's a version of that. Really, we don't have any unicorn customers who are only buying hundreds or thousands of electric trucks. So it ends up being that we need the customers that are purchasing the combustion trucks to also purchase the electric trucks to fill those requirements.
Yeah, so that's kind of balancing act, I guess, on the part of y'all as a dealer to help your customers understand that, right?
Absolutely. And a lot of this stuff is changing so rapidly, whether that we have to keep track of it, make sure we understand what our customers' needs are, in the immediate this year, but also really looking at the next 3 years. We've been working with our customers to make sure we understood what they needed for Oregon and Massachusetts for 2025, because if Oregon and Massachusetts had moved forward in implementing a low NOx omnibus in 2025, we wouldn't have been able to provide diesel engines to those customers. So making sure that they've got their orders filled and their needs filled ahead of time was really important. And then, continuing to work with them once the regulation or the regulating entity or regulating body updates the regulation to make sure that the customer has that updated information and can adjust their plan. Unfortunately, the only thing that's certain right now is that everything is very uncertain and there's not a very clear path forward. And so agility and being able to adapt to these changes and stay abreast of them is absolutely critical.
Cat Scale Company provides the professional driver with an accurate and certified weight. We are the #1 choice for professional drivers. Look for the black and gold sign to get the weights you know you can trust.
So, what are some of the things that you suggest to customers to deal with all this uncertainty? How do they make plans? How do they decide what to buy?
Yeah, so we work really closely with our customers as a partner to understand what their current needs are, what they're looking at for the next 5 years to figure out how do we make sure that we meet all of your needs, your replacement needs, and also your growth needs. Where are these vehicles going to be operating? That's one of the big changes to the way that a lot of trucking companies operate, and frankly, the way dealers operate. Historically, a lot of trucking companies would buy 1,000 trucks from us, have them meet their specs, and then decide where they would be deployed across the United States. Unfortunately, with the regulations as they stand today, we can't do that anymore. And so we actually have to know where they're going so that we can track credits and deficits. And that's a huge change in the way we all do business, from a dealership level to our customers. And so helping them understand those requirements so that, number one, it's not a surprise, and then working with them to understand their fleet operations so that they can provide us the information we need to get them the trucks they need.
Speaking of changing regulations, the California Air Resources Board made some changes to the low carbon fuel standard, I understand, recently. Any thoughts on what that means? I know in California that there's been a lot of frustration among trucking that things like renewable natural gas and renewable diesel don't seem to get a lot of love from the regulators. Are we seeing that change any?
So the low carbon fuel standard is a really important regulation to support renewable fuels in consumption in California, and it is ultimately a good thing for the producers of renewable natural gas and the consumers if they incorporate it into their fuel deal. But right now, the biggest challenge that we're seeing is that CARB's Advanced Clean Truck regulation and CARB's Advanced Clean Fleet regulation do not give any additional credit or any credit differing from diesel to the trucking company, or the OEM. So it's not like an OEM receives partial credit under the Advanced Clean Truck regulation for a near zero natural gas vehicle. It just counts the same as a diesel. So unfortunately, as it stands today, there is not that flexibility, but I'm hopeful that there's always room for improvement in the regulations and that some of these things can shift as, the market dynamics change.
I seem to recall, and I'm no attorney or regulatory expert, but that there's some language in some of the CARB regulations about we're going to evaluate how this is going with the switch to electric trucks and basically reserve the right to make some changes down the line. Think that might happen?
Well, I definitely don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did.
Yeah, we don't.
But I do think that given the election last week and the change of administration, there are going to be a lot of challenges to the existing regulations. And I'm hopeful that the CARB and the new administration will work with the federal government to maybe add some additional flexibilities. But I think that under the Clean Air Act, anything that's granted a waiver will be heavily protected by CARB. But I can't speculate there.
Any thoughts on how the election might affect the whole situation? I know the incoming administration seems to be looking at trying to cut down regulations. I would just guess that the EPA is probably going to be part of that. Any thoughts there?
I think we're going to have to wait and see what happens. I think that that's a very fair assumption based on all Trump's first presidency and the plans that he's laid out so far. However, what that actually looks like and what it actually materializes into, we'll have to wait and see. I think that I'm optimistic that the trucking community has an opportunity to have more realistic achievable goals in sight that work for everyone. However, a lot of these things can't go away overnight. And also the OEMs have invested billions of dollars, and there are other complicating factors like the Clean Truck Partnership between EMA and the OEMs and CARB, where they've agreed to comply. So it's going to take some time to play everything out in terms of what happens. But I think we're going to have to kind of wait and see. And that's why making sure that fleets are staying very close to their dealer partners and their OEM partners is critical, because as the regulations evolve and how policy evolves, they're going to have to adapt as well.
And regulations take time to change. And so fleets shouldn't be like, all right, we got a new president. I don't have to worry about this anymore. They might end up being caught in a bad situation trying to just wait for that.
Yeah, and I think that it's important. What my initial recommendation always to our customers is we can hope for the best, but let's have a contingency plan for both potential outcomes. Because if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So let's have a best case scenario and a plan that addresses that, and then also a plan that addresses the worst case scenario, so that there's no situation where the customer is left flat-footed and not able to run their business. Because our ultimate goal here is to make sure that customers are able to keep their trucks on the road, get the trucks they need to do their business.
Yeah, you mentioned about, the OEMs have already made all these investments. I remember several years ago with emissions regulations, and there was a loophole for glider kits. And there was all the stuff that went, legal challenges and whatnot. And I mentioned, okay, well, you can use glider kits. And one of the OEMs was like, we've already made this investment. We're not making glider kits anymore. So,
yeah, that's a perfect example. And it's just that they invested into the other alternative, and OEMs have to see an ROI as well.
Yeah.
Tired of dealing with less than ideal roads? So is Apollo Truck Tires, which is why we've engineered our Endutrax line for North America's toughest surfaces. From construction sites to gravel roads, Apollo Tires conquers the worst conditions with an industry-leading performance guarantee. In other words, they're smart tires for not smart roads. Visit ApolloTruckTires.com to learn more.
Do you I see more interest in options like perhaps leasing trucks as opposed to buying them to help deal with some of this uncertainty?
I think that leasing is a great option, and depending on the fleets, what their needs and their replacement cycle, there's so many different factors that come into play. Do they own the property where they're going to domicile the trucks? If they lease it, can they get approval to put infrastructure there? Or would they prefer to work through a charging as a service provider who can kind of do the whole package, or even the truck as a service provider? There's so many different options. Truck as a service is very similar to full service leasing in a lot of ways. And there are some benefits where, especially for smaller companies that may not have a team of people who can go identify sites to electrify, it may make more sense for them. But I think every fleet is going to have to figure out what works best for them, based on their location, their utility rates, their space on their property. We have a lot of customers who don't have the physical footprint to add charging infrastructure for their fleet. So do they go buy a new piece of property? Do they go lease a new piece of property? All of these different dynamics come into play.
And are you able to help them with some of those questions as well? Like it's not just selling a truck anymore.
Absolutely, yeah. We have a team. One of my colleagues, Coulter Saucer, he is the director of EV development here at Rush. And so he works with all of our OEMs and with our customers to identify the best electrification solutions for our customers' needs, and can help them with total cost of ownership calculators that are extremely extensive. I have not seen anything near comparable in the industry. It gets down to the nitty-gritty, the rate from the specific utility, and also includes the emission factors from that utility, finance rates, LCFS credit provisions. So it's a phenomenal tool, and we really encourage our customers to take advantage of it.
It's a lot of math. What about the state of incentives and grants and tax credits and stuff? I was at our Fleet Forward conference recently, and a panel was talking about that as regulations kick in, that some of the incentives are going away because those incentives were more designed to kind of kickstart early adopters. Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of a good rule of thumb when you're thinking about incentives is they typically do not pay for a fleet to do something that they're required from a regulatory standpoint to do. So if you think about it as early and extra or extra. So doing something earlier than you're required to do, getting an EV, years ahead of when you would be required to buy it, or buying a truck that is cleaner than you're required to do, which would generate emission reduction. So those are kind of the general rule of thumb. And on top of that, in California specifically, there are the additional challenges of budget constraints. And so, the money isn't just falling from the sky anymore. And so the tighter the budget becomes, the less money that there is available, and the greater focus that CARB and the other funding agencies typically have put on providing that funding to small fleets. Outside of California, there are a lot of great grant opportunities, and so it's important to look state by state, location by location, and then even utility by utility. If you've got multiple locations in a state that are serviced by different utilities, one of them could have much better make-ready or different utility incentives as well.
Yeah, the electric truck conversation tends to focus a lot on California because of the regulations, but it's not just a California thing. I mean, there are other areas of the country where there are incentives or regulations yet, or regulations coming in, where fleets are needing to look at that as well. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, there's a report out there, I think that CalSTAR put it out, but it shows all the medium and heavy duty truck deployments across the country last year, and the volume of medium and heavy duty zero emission trucks that are by state. And Texas is actually number 2 behind California. And a lot of that has to do with the economics can work. Electricity is very expensive in California, ironically, wherever this is all being pushed, but the ROI can happen, especially when you look at the medium duty market. It can make total sense. And when it makes sense for the business, people do it on their own, which ultimately is the goal. We don't want this subsidy environment to go on forever. We want the electric trucks to stand on their own and have a use case that works.
What are some of the common questions that you get from your customers?
When should I start looking at adding charging to my site? And
3 years ago?
Yeah, 2 years ago, last year, yesterday, anytime except for tomorrow. But yeah, really, the sooner that our customers can have a plan, I'm not saying implement it everywhere, but identify key sites where where the routes are potential good fits for electrification. And if they don't know where to start with that, we're here to help them identify those routes. Understanding really what their future procurement plans are is very important. So where are you going to want trucks? Where are you looking to grow? Where are you looking to replace trucks? All of that's really critical for us to be able to provide trucks to our customers moving forward.
What about maintenance? Are y'all basically doing the maintenance for electric trucks, or are you got fleets that are training their technicians and outfitting their shops to be able to do their own maintenance?
It's a combination of both. I would say right now it's more heavily that our own technicians are doing the maintenance. We do have technicians deployed at customer locations as well, and have mobile technicians who are certified to do EV work. So it's a hybrid, and I think especially in the early years that using dealer and OEM certified technicians is going to be the primary maintenance pathway, but it'll evolve as time goes on.
All right, Lacy, I think that's all the questions that I had. Anything else that you can think of that our listeners, viewers to know?
Try to be patient, but a lot of the regulatory landscape over the next couple years and even couple months is going to be very interesting, and it's going to evolve quickly. So stay close to your dealer, and also just be patient as the information changes, because it's going to be interesting.
Well, maybe we'll check back with you in a few months.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks so much, Lacy.
Thanks.
That was Lacy Robertson with Rush Enterprises. Thanks for watching or listening to this episode of HDT Talks Trucking. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss an episode.